In recording macros in Excel, you can use an absolute reference or a relative reference. Absolute reference is the default way macros are recorded in Excel, unless you specify to the program to use a relative reference. And you do that by clicking the Use Relative References command button up here. The difference between the two are when you use an absolute reference to record your macro, the absolute reference macro will always go back to the selected cell or range of cells during its execution, whereas the relative reference macro will execute itself relative to its initial selected cell. In this lesson, I'm going to create two macros, one that use the absolute reference in recording a macro and the other that use a relative reference in recording a macro. So let's begin. I want to create a macro that writes my name in cell A4 here using the absolute reference, and then it's going to write my name and also provide some formatting to my name. Okay, so again, by default in Excel, when recording macros, it will use the absolute reference. And later on, we'll tell it to use the relative reference, and we'll do that by going up here by clicking the Use Relative Reference. And then this command button will have a shade around it, as you see here. But right now, for this particular macro, we are going to use the absolute reference. So let's begin. I'm going to go under the Developer tab, go over to the Code group, and click on Record Macro. And I'm going to give the macro a name. I'm going to call it example 1. And I'm not going to give it a keystroke. I'm going to leave it in this book here, this workbook here, and I'm going to click OK. So now I'm going to go here, put in my name. Now, when recording macros, the best thing to do is to press Control on your keyboard and hit Enter, and that will keep the focus on the cell. So instead of the regular hit Enter, where when you hit Enter regularly, it leaves the focus of the active cell and then go below it, making the below cell the active cell. If you press Control key on your keyboard and press Enter, it will keep the focus on the active cell. So for example, I'm going to press Control key and then hit Enter. And as you can see, the focus is still on the active cell. So now I can go up here, go to increase the font. I'm going to increase the font here. And then I'm going to do a bold. And then I'm going to do an italic. And then I'm going to change the font to red. Okay? And once I do that, I'm going to go back to the Developer tab. And I'm going to stop recording. Okay, so now the recording has stopped. I'm going to go back to the Home tab and I'm going to remove all formatting and also clear the content of that cell. So I'm going to go to the editing group under here, click this eraser icon here, click the drop down arrow next to it, and clear all. I'm going to clear all, and that will clear the content and also all the formatting that was added to the cell. There you go. So now we did that. Now I'm going to try to run the macro. I'm going to go back to the Developer tab and I'm going to run the macro. I'm going to try to run the macro and put it in this cell. I'm going to try to run the macro in K5, cell K5, and you'll see what happens. Okay, so I'm going to go select K5, which is selected, and I'm going to go to macros. And here is example 1. I'm going to try to run example 1 macro that I just recorded and see what happens. Okay, you see what happens? It goes back to cell A4. Okay, I'm going to try it again. I want it to be run here. I want it to be run on F8. So I go back to macros, and it keeps going back to cell A4. So that basically means yeah, the absolute reference was used, and the absolute reference is A4. So that means each time you run this macro, go back to A4 where you recorded it in. Okay, so that's the absolute reference being used. So now let's create our macro using the relative reference. So I'm going to come here, and I'm going to choose use relative references. So I'm going to click that. Okay, and then I'm going to select the cell A12 here, and then I'm going to go up to record macro. And I'm going to give it a name, example 2. And I'm going to hit OK. So now I'm going to come and write my name. And again, I'm going to press Control key and then press the Enter. I'm going to hold down the Control key and press Enter to leave the focus on the active cell. Okay, so now I'm going to go to Home. I'm going to increase the font. I'm going to make it bold, italic, and then I'm going to give it a font color. Let's make it blue, this one. Okay, and then I'm going to go back to the developer tab. I'm going to stop recording. Okay, and then I'm going to go home. I'm going to go to the editing group and then clear the content and the formatting that I placed in that cell. Clear all. Okay, so now that's done. Okay, so now let's run the macro where we use the relative reference. Now I want to put it here. I wanna execute this macro here. Okay, so I'm gonna go to developer. I'm gonna go to macros, and I'm gonna choose example 2, and I'm gonna run it. And there you go. So it runs it in the active cell that I selected. So I'm gonna go here, try it again, macros, example 2, and there you go. I can place it anywhere. Okay, example, macro 2, and there you go. Let's try to do the same thing with the example 1. Let me try to put the example 1 macro here. Let's try that. So there you go, example 1. Nope, it's not going to happen. It'll always go back to A4. That's the example 1 macro that's using the absolute reference. Whereas the one that uses the relative reference, I can place it anywhere. Macro, example 2, and there you go, as you can see. Okay, so that is the difference in using the absolute reference macro and the relative reference macro. Okay, so thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.